Imagine driving through the French countryside and stumbling upon Chateau de Lasman. It's gorgeous, but it's basically a ghost, hollow rooms, cracked stone, and towers that look like they're just tired of standing. Most people would see a money pit, but when Billy, Gwendoline, and Patrick showed up, they saw a gold mine of potential. They started documenting the whole thing on YouTube, and honestly, people ate it up. It became this slow-living escape for millions of viewers who loved watching the history of the estate come back to life. It felt like a modern fairy tale. But, as with most fairy tales, if you look behind the curtain, the magic had a very specific source. It's such a classic opposites attract setup, but on a massive scale. You have Billy, this working-class guy from Cornwall, who just seemed to have this spark of defiance in him from day one. He's the type of person who's always up for a laugh but has zero patience for anyone telling him what to do. His stint in the British Army is the perfect example of that. It's about as rigid as the system can get, and for someone like Billy, it was a total oil and water situation. Going AWOL wasn't just a mistake, it was a loud statement that he was going to live life on his own terms. Consequences be damned. Then you have Gwendoline, who lived in a completely different reality. She grew up with that quiet, unshakable security that only comes from being part of an industrial dynasty. The Le Saffray name is massive. It's the kind of wealth that's woven into the very fabric of global industry. While Billy was rebelling against the system, Gwendoline was essentially a part of it, backed by generations of success. The turning point was 2015. When Gwendoline's mother passed away, it wasn't just a personal loss, it was the financial catalyst that changed everything. That inheritance took their what-if conversations and turned them into a business plan. It's the moment the fantasy of living in a French chateau actually became a real possibility. It makes you wonder, though, without that sudden influx of Les Saffray money, would they have ever taken the plunge? It really changes how you look at their early videos, knowing that the dream was backed by one of the biggest fortunes in France. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, how these two people from completely different planets even crossed paths in the first place. You've got Billy, the rebellious guy from Cornwall with a dishonorable discharge, and Gwendoline, the heiress to an industrial fortune. While the exact meet-cute details are something they've kept a bit closer to the chest, it seems they hit it off right as Billy was looking for a fresh start away from the UK. Even before the inheritance from Gwendoline's mother landed in 2015, they were already dreaming big. They had this vision of combining Billy's restless, do-it-yourself energy with a life in France. But honestly, before that money hit the bank, those plans were mostly just talk and small-scale property ideas. The inheritance was the real level up. It took their ambition and gave it wheels. It allowed them to skip over the buying a fixer-upper apartment phase and go straight to buying a 19th-century estate with its own village. It's fascinating because it suggests that the ambition was always there. They just needed the Le Saffray fortune to actually unlock the map. It makes you realize that their modern fairy tale wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a collision of Billy's drive to escape his past and Gwendoline's sudden ability to fund a brand new future. The leap of faith with a safety net. It's such a classic smoke and mirrors move, isn't it? By 2016, they had found the place. This massive, sprawling 19th-century estate called Château de la Basmaignée. It wasn't just a house, it was 60 acres, a private chapel, and enough outbuildings that you could basically call it a small village. On screen, they played the struggling dreamers card perfectly. They told their subscribers they were literally betting it all, putting every single penny of their life savings into this one wild shot at a new life. It was a narrative that felt so human and so inspiring because everyone wants to believe they could do the same. It was the ultimate underdog story, and it's what really bonded their audience to them. But when you pull back the curtain, that leap of faith starts to look more like a walk across a very sturdy, very expensive bridge. That bridge was paved entirely by Gwendoline's family money. Finding out she was part of the Le Saffray dynasty, one of the wealthiest industrial families in France, changes the vibe completely. It wasn't a risk, it was a renovation project with a massive multi-generational safety net underneath it. That gap between the struggle we saw on YouTube and the reality of the industrial inheritance was really the first time the mask slipped. It makes you realize that the authenticity they were selling was actually a very carefully crafted product. They weren't just fixing up a chateau, they were branding a lifestyle. And the first step was making sure we didn't see the bank account that was actually making it all possible. Why it matters. That's the thing that really trips people up. The hard work and the sweat you see on screen are real. Billy really is up there on the scaffolding, and they really are putting in those grueling 18-hour days. But when you find out about the money and the history, the stakes of that work shift completely. It's no longer a story about a family one bad week away from losing it all. It's a story about massive inheritance and cold ambition wrapped up in a very, very clever marketing package. It's a reality check that even the most authentic YouTube journeys usually have a much more complicated engine running under the hood. And honestly, that's where the modern fairy tale stops being a cozy DIY story and takes this dark cinematic turn. It's one thing to find out that your favorite scrappy creators actually have a massive trust fund. That's just annoying. But it's a whole other level of what did I just watch? To find out they have a criminal record for looting sacred artifacts. It turns the whole narrative on its head. Suddenly, you aren't just watching a renovation, you're watching people who have proven they're willing to dismantle the history of one community to build a brand out of the history of another. It's that contrast that makes the story so hard to look away from. You have the beautiful, peaceful footage of a chateau at sunset, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking about those 76 stolen items and the military desertion. It forces you to look at every honest day's work Billy does through a different lens. Is he restoring that wall because he loves history, or is he just building the set for the next high-revenue video? It's the ultimate paradox of the influencer age. Can something be real and fake at the same exact time? The TV spark. It's crazy how perfect that TV debut was, right? Escape to the Chateau DIY basically served them a captive audience on a silver platter. They were the ultimate aspirational couple, young, good-looking, and seemingly fearless in the face of a renovation project that would make most people run for the hills. The show leaned into that charm so hard, focusing on the cute family moments and the grit of the work, and the public just fell in love with them. Once they realized they had that magic it factor, they didn't waste any time. They jumped ship from TV to YouTube, where they could control the narrative completely. And honestly, the way they built a family network was a genius business move. It wasn't just Billy and Gwendoline anymore. Suddenly you had Michael over at Doing It Ourselves and Sadie bringing her own perspective to the mix. It turned the renovation into a soap opera where you felt like you were part of the inner circle. If you liked the main show, you had 3 other channels to binge-watch, creating this massive ecosystem of content that just fed back into itself. By the time they announced the purchase of the abandoned convent in 2021, they were at the absolute peak of their power. It was such a high-stakes move, taking on a massive, Gothic, crumbling building while still finishing the chateau. To the millions of people watching, it felt like they were witnessing the rise of a modern-day dynasty. They weren't just fixing houses, they were building an empire based on kinship and resilience. From the outside looking in, they were totally untouchable. They had the fame, the family, and the massive projects that kept the views and the money pouring in. It's wild to think that while everyone was focused on the Gothic beauty of that convent, the detectives in the audience were already starting to pull at the threads of the past. The Chateauverse digs deep. It's kind of wild to watch the internet detectives at work, isn't it? The Chateauverse community is basically this massive, decentralized investigative unit made up of fans, historians, and skeptics who spend their time cross-referencing every little detail these creators share. And with Billy, they hit the jackpot. For years, his backstory was just this vague, charming rebel without a cause narrative. He was the guy who just didn't fit into the system. But when the community started pulling at the threads, that clash with authority in the military turned out to be way more serious than a simple personality conflict. It wasn't just that he didn't like taking orders. It turned out he had actually deserted. In military terms, that's not just quitting. It's a massive legal and ethical breach. He was eventually dismissed with dishonor, which is basically the ultimate do-not-hire stamp on a person's record. The Chateauverse sleuths found that this wasn't just a youthful mistake he was open about. It was something that had been carefully polished over to fit the bohemian YouTube persona. But as the community kept digging, they realized the desertion was really just the opening act. It was like they'd pulled one loose string and the whole carefully knitted sweater of his working-class hero image started to unravel. It's a reminder that when you invite millions of people into your home every week, you're also inviting them into your past. And in the digital age, those quiet secrets have a way of getting very loud very fast. The desertion was the first sign that the guy we were seeing on screen might be a totally different person than the guy in the official records. But like I said, that was just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper they went, the darker it got. The sacred theft scandal. This is the part of the story that feels like it belongs in a gritty heist movie, not a cozy YouTube vlog about limestone and lavender. When those French court documents finally went public, they dropped a total bombshell that completely recontextualized who Billy and Gwendoline really were. It turns out that back in 2014, while everyone thought they were just these idealistic dreamers looking for a project, they were actually operating as a highly coordinated getaway team. This wasn't some random, impulsive act of rebellion either. For about 10 months, they systematically targeted rural churches all across Brittany and Mayenne. The sheer scale of the operation is what's so shocking. They hit dozens of churches and walked away with 76 sacred objects. We aren't talking about a few dusty old books. They were taking gold chalices, ancient reliquaries that held religious relics, and ornate historical crosses. These are items that had sat in these small-town churches for centuries, surviving wars and revolutions, only to be lifted in the middle of the night. The roles were as clear-cut as a professional job. Billy was the one on the ground, actually breaking into the sanctuaries, while Gwendoline sat behind the wheel as the getaway driver. And if anyone thought this was some misguided attempt at collecting history, the motive proved otherwise. These items weren't being kept as trophies, they were being flipped. Objects started appearing in antique markets and on various online shops, showing that the whole operation was a calculated move to turn religious heritage into cold, hard cash. It's just such a massive departure from the bohemian vibe they've spent years cultivating. To think that while they were planning their future as the faces of French Chateau restoration, they were actively dismantling the history of the very region they wanted to move into. It's a level of hypocrisy that's hard to wrap your head around. They weren't just looking for a home, they were allegedly looting the neighborhood to pay for it. The fallout. It's the ultimate glitch in the matrix for anyone following the Chateau flipping world. When the police finally pieced it all together, the image of the Pethericks as these bohemian, free-spirited restorers didn't just crack. It shattered. We're talking about a family that built their entire brand on the idea of breathing life into history and honoring the past. But the investigation painted a picture of a couple that was systematically stripping it away for parts. There is something so jarring about the calculated nature of it all. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of desperation. It was a 10-month-long spree. While they were scouting for their dream home and talking about possibility, they were allegedly treating the local rural churches like an unlocked warehouse. Using your partner as a getaway driver to flip sacred relics for antique market cash is a far cry from the cozy candlelit dinners and family-first values they show on camera. The story shifted from young family saves a chateau to couple loots local history to buy a chateau. It's the definition of an influencer paradox. You have this high-income, sanitized digital presence where everything is soft lighting, gardening tips, and adorable kid moments, sitting right on top of a documented criminal history involving the theft of 76 sacred objects. It's like they're living two lives at once, one that's public and flawless, and one that's buried in court documents. What's truly wild is how that tension plays out in real time. Every time Billy picks up a tool to restore a wall, you can't help but wonder if that work is being funded by the very thing he's claiming to protect. They've managed to weaponize the aesthetic of heritage to cover up the fact that they were once the ones dismantling it. It's a masterclass in irony, saving a monument while standing on a foundation built from the pieces of dozens of others. The verdict and the silent strategy. The day of reckoning. It's a pretty bitter pill to swallow when you look at the math of that sentence. For the local communities in Brittany and Mayenne, that legal hammer probably felt more like a gentle tap. After all the years of tension and the shock of Billy being held in pre-trial detention, the final verdict seems almost tiny compared to the damage done. Billy walked away with a 1-year suspended sentence and a €15,000 fine. And Gwendoline was hit with €10,000. When you put those numbers up against their reported monthly income of €20,000, it's hard not to see it as just a cost of doing business. They essentially paid off their legal debt with about 5 or 6 weeks of YouTube ad revenue and Patreon donations. For a couple living in a massive chateau and buying up old convents, That kind of money is basically a rounding error. It's no wonder the local congregations are still feeling that sting. To them, these weren't just items. They were sacred objects, part of their town's soul and history for generations. The real tragedy is that likely sitting in private collections part. While some things were recovered, dozens of those 76 objects are just gone. They've vanished into the black market or onto someone's private shelf, and they might never see the light of day again. There is a massive irony in watching a family get celebrated globally for saving French heritage, while the very people they took that heritage from are left staring at empty spots on their altars. It creates this really uncomfortable dynamic where the Pethericks are basically using the beauty of the French countryside to build their brand, while the actual people who live there feel like their history was looted to pay for the initial deposit. It's a story of two different realities, one where a guilty plea is a minor speed bump on the way to fame, and another where a community loses its past and doesn't even get an apology. The delete and ignore tactic. It's honestly surreal when you think about the sheer nerves that takes. In a world where every minor cancellation usually leads to a 20-minute video of a creator sighing into a camera with no makeup on, the Pethericks just didn't. They went the complete opposite direction with a strategy of absolute unwavering silence. If you were just a casual viewer scrolling through their feed, you would never even know a trial took place. There was no "we need to talk" video, no community post, not even a cryptic quote about difficult times. They essentially decided that the trial for grand theft of sacred artifacts simply didn't exist in the world of their YouTube channel. It's a level of commitment to a brand that is almost frightening. One day they are standing in a courtroom in Rennes pleading guilty to looting 76 historic treasures, and literally the next, they are back in the garden, smiling at the camera and talking about the best way to trim a hedge or show off a new piece of masonry. For a lot of people, that silence felt way more calculated than the actual crimes. It wasn't just moving on, it was a total refusal to break character. They treated their audience less like a community and more like a consumer base that only needed to see the polished final product. By not acknowledging it, they didn't give the scandal any oxygen. They knew that if they didn't talk about it, their most loyal fans wouldn't either, and the algorithm would just keep serving up the fairy tale to new people who had no idea about the shadows in the background. It really highlights the uncanny valley of influencer life. You feel like you know them, you've seen their sun nest grow up, you've seen their private chapel, you've seen their messy renovation here, but then you realize you only know exactly what they've allowed you to see. That wall between the content and the truth is reinforced with steel. It makes you wonder if they can keep a secret that big while the cameras are rolling every day, what else is staying out of the frame? The math behind the magic. One of the most eye-opening parts of this whole saga came right out of the courtroom. During the trial, we finally got a rare, unedited look at the actual finances behind that Chateau life, and the numbers are honestly staggering. Billy testified under oath that their YouTube channel alone is pulling in anywhere from €10,000 to €20,000 every single month. When you stop and think about that, it completely changes the scrappy underdog narrative they've been selling. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. When you start stacking up the different layers of their income, you realize how deep their safety net actually goes. You've got the Patreon supporters, which is basically a steady stream of direct cash from their most loyal fans. Then you have the holiday rentals, where fans are literally paying a premium to step inside the world they see on screen. And of course, the biggest piece of the puzzle, Gwendoline's massive industrial inheritance from the Les Affriers dynasty. When you put it all together, the image of a young couple taking a reckless leap of faith starts to feel a bit more like a calculated business move. They were never actually at risk of failing. Instead, they've managed to build this perfect, self-sustaining loop. The digital brand pays for the physical restoration, and the restoration provides the high-stakes content that fuels the brand. It's a brilliant business model, but it definitely strips away that romantic all-or-nothing vibe that drew so many people in at the start. When the financial details and the court verdict finally broke cover, the reaction from the community was like a grenade going off in a very quiet, very pretty room. It wasn't just a single wave of anger. It was more like a massive, messy fracture in the fan base. For a huge chunk of their followers, the news felt like a total betrayal of trust. These were people who had been watching for years, feeling inspired by what they thought was a down-to-the-last-cent struggle to save a piece of history. When they found out the couple was pocketing up to €20,000 a month from YouTube alone, all while having a multi-million euro industrial inheritance in the bank, the relatable vibe vanished instantly. People started looking at the scaffolding and the dusty work clothes through a much more cynical lens, feeling like they'd been sold a poverty cosplay version of life that never actually existed. But then you have the other side of the fence. A surprisingly large number of fans circled the wagons. Their argument was basically, I don't care what they did in the past or how much they make. I just like the videos. For them, the YouTube channel is a form of therapy or escape. They were willing to overlook the church thefts and the hidden wealth, because the end product, the beautiful chateau and the family moments, was more valuable to them than the ethical reality behind it. It created this weird, tense atmosphere in the comments where any mention of the trial was either deleted by the channel or jumped on by loyalists, telling people to just focus on the beauty. The most common feeling, though, was just a deep sense of unease about the silence. Fans were waiting for that moment of truth video that never came. By choosing to act like the trial never happened, the Pethericks essentially told their audience, we don't owe you an explanation. That refusal to be accountable is what really stuck in people's throats. It proved that the relationship between the creator and the fan is often just a one-way street. We give them our time and money, but they don't necessarily feel the need to give us the truth. It's a fascinating look at how fandom can actually shield people from the consequences of their actions. So, where exactly does that leave them today? If you pull up their channel right now, you'd see that the Petherick empire is not just surviving. It's actually thriving. They're still very much living the dream at Château de Lasman, still pouring their energy into that massive, slightly eerie, abandoned convent, and they're doing it all in front of an audience that just keeps growing. But if you look closely behind the scenes, you start to see that the happily ever after has some real tension under the surface. Billy's brother, Michael, has his own channel, and every now and then he lets a bit of the mask slip. You see flashes of family rivalries, or just the pure, crushing stress of trying to manage two monumental estates at the same time. It's a lot for any family to carry. And while the main Petherick channel stays perfectly polished and unified, Michael's videos sometimes give you a hint that the pressure is very real. Honestly, the whole situation is a masterclass in how to manage a public image. They've basically proven that if you have the right foundation, specifically that old money inheritance to fall back on, and you use new media like YouTube as a shield, you can pretty much outrun anything. Most people would have been completely wiped out by a scandal involving the looting of churches, but they've managed to turn the page and just keep building. They've essentially created a world where the beauty of what they're making today is loud enough to drown out the echoes of what they did yesterday. It's a fascinating, slightly unsettling look at how reinvention works in 2026. They aren't going anywhere. And as long as the content is beautiful and the stonework is satisfying, it seems like their audience is more than happy to stay for the ride. It's honestly wild when you step back and look at the whole picture, isn't it? The Petherick story is like this perfect high-definition case study in how to manage a reputation in the social media age. They've essentially built this beautiful, sun-drenched fortress out of French limestone and clever editing, and it's designed to keep the messier parts of their lives firmly outside the gates. It's a complete choose-your-own-adventure for the audience. You can either lean into the romance of the stonework and the family moments, or you can look at the court records and see a totally different narrative. What's really interesting is how they've mastered the art of moving on without ever actually looking back. By keeping their website focused on those dreamy holiday rentals, and their YouTube channel locked onto the satisfying rhythm of DIY, they've created this filtered reality. They're betting on the fact that the internet has a notoriously short memory. For a new subscriber who just found them today, those crimes from 2014 or the guilty plea from 2024 don't even exist. If it's not in the video feed, it didn't happen. That kind of silence is actually a really powerful survival tactic. It lets them keep the fairy tale alive without ever having to break character or deal with the awkwardness of an apology. At the end of the day, Billy and Gwendoline are a walking paradox. It's a bit of a head trip to realize that the same people who spent 10 months systematically looting 76 sacred artifacts from tiny rural churches are the same people now being praised for saving French heritage. It shows you that people aren't just one thing. They are capable of doing something really destructive and then turning around and doing something genuinely creative and restorative. Their chateau isn't just a house anymore. It's a monument to the idea that you can reinvent yourself as long as you have the money and the media's savvy to control the cameras. So, as they keep working on that massive convent and posting their weekly updates, this big, heavy question just kind of hangs over the towers of Lasman. Can you actually fix a moral mistake with physical labor? Can you restore your way out of a criminal past? If you're a villager in Brittany looking at an empty spot where 100-year-old chalice used to be, the answer's probably a hard no. But if you're one of the millions of people watching them from your living room, finding peace in their garden updates, the answer feels like a yes. The stones of that chateau are going to carry both of those truths for a long time. The grandeur they've built and the shadows they've tried to leave behind.